We didn't value our culture enough to represent and appreciate it, but we wait for validation from somebody else. That validation comes with price.
It all comes down to the mindset, and you've mentioned luxury a couple of times, and I'm tempted to ask, what standard do we use to define luxury? Because that's a conversation in itself.
We need to educate ourselves to embrace our culture, who we are. We're part of luxury. We're not just mediocre houses or mediocre designers.
The creative sector is overly romanticized.
Yeah.
The lights and the glamour, the makeup, the hair, the this and the that, and people often get carried away by what it looks like, not necessarily thinking about how much work goes into that beautiful picture moment.
Anything I make has a Sierra Leonean imprint for global consumption. Don't just think local, you've got to think global.
Welcome to Honestly Speaking, the podcast where we have honest conversations about the issues, ideas, values, systems shaping our lives. I'm your host, Antonia Howard, and today's conversation explores what it means to build something rooted in culture, visible and uncompromising in global spaces. Across Africa and the diaspora, culture is traveling faster than ever. Through arts, music, film, fashion, and fashion in particular has become one of the most visible ways African identity enters global conversations. At its most powerful, fashion holds memory, it carries history, and it shapes how we are seen. But visibility is not the same as power, and representation is not the same as authorship. So the question becomes, how do we build something that is visible globally while maintaining the power to shape your narrative and your stories? My guest today is Foday Dumbuya, founder and creative director of LABRUM. His work insists that fashion can speak with intention, not just style. Thank you for joining me on Honestly Speaking.
Thanks for having me.
I think I'll start with your beginning, when you first, before this became a business, before LABRUM became a brand, what's your earliest memory of clothes meaning something to you?
My earliest meaning for me was, it kind of stems back from my dad, let's say my parents, the way they dress, their style code, mixing West African style with British tailoring. And I think seeing that growing up in a home where they mix the two so well, I think that's where it came from. It's like hearing my dad talking about representation, the way you look is always something that people would judge you by. If you go to a meeting with someone, if you're not immaculately dressed, smart, presentable, that's like a cross for them to not take you seriously. So I think once I understand that as a young kid, and it becomes paramount to me that I represented myself well, look good, and that's when I started taking keen interest in style, because for me style is everlasting. Fashion is a trend. I don't go down that route in terms of like my brand. It kind of stems around style, around fabrication, around history and story. So, and that's what it's been from day one.
And with LABRUM focusing on storytelling, I look at the designs, and in one way or the other, they represent not just Africa generally, but for some, Sierra Leone specifically. And you can tell that the brand stands for something. But I wonder, is there or are there stories you're refusing to tell when it comes to what LABRUM represents?
For us, it's not like I pick and choose stories. It's stories that relate to me, myself, my family, my culture. And also where I grew up in London, British culture. It's like how we sort of tell the story that relates to my journey. And also, I set up the brand to tell stories about South Africa, specifically Sierra Leone, about London, about African textiles, about our music, the joyfulness that come out of when we create music, where it kind of derived from. I think the brand encapsulates all of that in terms of like what stories that we do. So if something doesn't kind of align with me, and if I didn't do a thorough research or understand, I don't tend to kind of engage until I understand the fundamental of that story, how that ties back into my heritage, or sort of British heritage, London as a whole. So, and the brand set up to be able to be like a voice for the unknown and the unheard, so that we can always also educate people about probably stories that they don't know about themselves, because not everyone tends to understand history or African history. And it's this thing about also pioneering the idea of like, is African history global history? Because it's a question that's been asked, has been talked about. But we're here to say to people, look around you, look at the things that we've pioneered, we've been part of, look at the innovations that we've been part of. How can you not tell me African history is global history? And we are there to reaffirm that and educate people about our world and where we came from and where we're going. And that's what the brand interested. We take an interest in those stories that we know or you don't see on the mainstream media. It's like we want to bring it to life.
What's the driver of that intention for you? Because you could easily create fashion that is commercial, likable, doesn't necessarily have any meaning to it. Why did you set off to do that in the first place?
That's what I said, like when growing up, looking at in London, African fashion and African textiles and African stories wasn't presented the right way, and the way we know it, I know it, my family know it. And if you come from a home that actually value history or value culture, you would have learned a lot more about what your culture means. But I don't see that representation on the mainstream media. I worked in fashion, I don't see that. And all I see is more of like when you talk about cloth, when people see all this like Adidas cloth or all this like wax cotton, everyone just assume that's African. And they don't fundamentally look into like where African cloth is from. It's like when you look at, we're talking about the woven cloth, and you talk about the how you call it, the cotton cloth, like all of that. It's like a beautiful piece of artistry that we have within the African culture, but those are not what in the public domain. And so much that when you travel abroad and you travel to Europe and you engage with people and talk about indigo dye, and they always refer back to it's kind of derived from Japan. And then you look back at the history of indigo dye, it kind of started over 600 years ago back in a place in Nigeria. But if you trace back Japan's history of indigo cloth, it goes back 300 years. So I'm confused as to like, am I dumb? Like, can we not look at what history is saying? Or is the African history being disregarded? And so these are the things that kind of fired me up in terms of like, we must tell African stories. We must bring it to the forefront in the mainstream. We must bring it into luxury fashion, because our tradition and our culture has been copied and sold back to us or packaged back to us.
And that's what I wanted to ask you just a second ago when you talked about luxury. Do you work? In fact, I don't think it is a worry now. But what do you think about, African aesthetics, or so to speak, being commercialized? You have, very big brands just slapping on things that they believe represent African culture or just African identity generally to sell their brands.
It's flattering, not gonna lie. Like, people see our culture as something that they could cash in on or sell it back to us. And I think the fundamental issue there is, like, we didn't value our culture enough to represent and appreciate it, but we wait for validation from somebody else. And that's always the problem. And that validation comes with price. And now you have younger designers in the continent that are doing amazing work, that bringing those stories to the forefront in the mainstream media. Instead of we support them, we kind of like half-hearted support them in a way that doesn't give them the confidence to develop something from the continent. So we wait for someone else, like the likes of, like I said, Dior, the Prada, the LV, to kind of validate the stories. And then we were like, oh yeah, I'm trying to reclaim it. Now this is us. What happened? The story was always there. And there's amazing designers, African designers that I was telling, the diaspora was telling, they're creating pieces that kind of ties back into that. So I think my thing is, like, we need to educate ourselves to embrace our culture, who we are, and look at that as we're part of luxury. We're not just mediocre houses or mediocre designers. And we do extensive research and bring these stories to life. If it's good for Dior, it's also good for LABRUM. It's also good for the likes of all the other brands. Yeah. The young, like, emerging designers are coming from Africa.
Yeah, when we look at young designers in Africa, I would narrow it down to West Africa. Tokyo James, Orange Culture, Studio 189, 189. These are brands standing out for their storytelling. From your perspective, what separates a fashion brand that owns its narratives and tells stories from a culturally rooted point of view, from those that are just packaging culture and selling it for global consumption?
People have to be authentic. Authenticity is key, and you can see, like you mentioned, the likes of Tokyo James, who I really know well and hang out with him in Milan. When we talk about our culture and when we talk about garment construction, you can tell the passion's coming from, we want to make beautiful clothes that actually reflect our culture. And that conversation is what kind of drives us into, like, creating those textiles that represent us, which sits within luxury. And anyone's that represent that, anyone's that go to the extra mile and bring those stories to life from a luxury perspective, I respect, because I can see where they're going and I can see what they're trying to do, and I respect that. And that's why, like I said, people like him, and you got a host of other designers that are actually creating that world, but sometimes the consumer and the so-called celebrities and tastemakers that are African or black, they need to support that. And because they have an audience that actually look up to them. And if all they see is these people validating only LV, the Prada and the Gucci, the younger generation also going to go down that route. And how do we change that perspective?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think it all comes down to the mindset. And you've mentioned luxury a couple of times, and I'm tempted to ask, what standard do we use to define luxury? Because that's a conversation in itself. You've talked about, us as Africans, as Sierra Leoneans, not necessarily appreciating our culture and what we have until it is validated by someone else. And we're like, yes, this is us. So when it comes to luxury, who are the taste makers? And where do you see Africa in that? Let's say in the last 10, 15 years, the trajectory Africa has taken.
For me, what I look at out here, I look at people that actually represent the people. People that, the like of Idris Elba, the like of Big Zoo, the likes of like Clara Amfo, she's a friend of mine. I would name few that represent the people. They are for the people. People like those, when they wear your clothes, they appreciate it. And the love and care that they show, it's just something you wanted to replicate, and hoping that other celebrities and other tastemakers or people out there can have the same energy and passion when they wear our constructed garments. Not just what they get paid for, to be able to justify and showcase and be proud and support. Because sometimes, obviously, they get paid a lot of money to represent these brands, but equally show the same energy. If you feel that garment sort of depict luxury, then say it, be part of it. Because we spend a lot of time in research, development, creating fabrics and textiles that sits with the likes of those other luxury brands that we look at. So it's not dissimilar of what we're creating. It's just that we're creating on a smaller scale and more even artisans, because we work with like our local like seamstresses that come in to work with us. Together we build something, we create something. So it should be represented. It should be talked about, and it should be equally see that they're light like everybody and all the other big brands.
And for you, what does it mean to protect the integrity of the stories, the history, the authenticity of whatever design you are creating?
Yeah, it's got to have a meaning for me. So when I create stories, I create with people so that you're part of it. And the people that purchase LABRUM, they purchase LABRUM because they feel like they can be part of the story. And it's hard to find sometimes, like, because you can do something that's host hype, and a lot of people will just get on the hype, but with no soul. But for us, it's like we connect that soul to the garments, to the textiles, and then in turn engage with our consumer in terms of like the story, the fabrication, and where does that, and how does that sit in with their own sort of story as well. So it's always imperative to kind of make sure the narrative is there. For example, when I come to Sierra Leone, it's not just inspiration. It's like this place is full of creativity. So it's, as much as you're inspired, there's creatives that gives you that boost, that energy to be part of something. So you have to nurture those stories and keep those stories. And then also, for me, it's like we want to educate and inform the unknown. And that's the thing that drives me. And then that's the thing. That's why when I get to a story, I kind of embrace the story. I get into the nitty-gritty of that story and make sure I am pioneering the story and I'm telling it the right way that people can understand and learn and maybe embrace it.
Right. And what does it take to maintain that? You've done a lot of global work. Key for the Sierra Leone community include the partnership with, Adidas and Arsenal FC. We've seen the work that you've done with the away jersey, and there was intentionality behind not just the design, but the entire rollout of the campaign, from collaborating with filmmakers and photographers and models here in Sierra Leone, your home. What does it take to collaborate with such big brands, global brands, and not dilute what you stand for?
Yeah. That's why I pick and choose the brands that I work with. They have to embody my spirit. They have to embody my community, my culture. And Adidas and Arsenal did in this part, where we talked about how powerful the story is in terms of celebrating the Arsenal Africa fan base. For me, it's bigger than anything, because we're celebrating my home. We're celebrating my people. And that's why I said, before we become existent in the Western world, we have to go back to where it started when our parents, when African countries started having independence. We're talking about 1920s. And if the color palette is Pan-African inspired, then we have to go back to those times when Marcus Garvey kind of formed the African Union and the Pan-African, sorry. And I think that's what I wanted to stem that on, but also flip it back to me as an individual born in Sierra Leone, in Freetown. I thought, let's take it back to 360 and bring it back home, where the story kind of started for me. That's why we shot here. And then me coming home, and I know there's a lot of creatives that I work with, the photographers and filmmakers, and I'm like, I'm bringing a big, well, I wouldn't even say a huge opportunity back at home. Let's collaborate with everybody that wants to go somewhere. This can give people a platform to be able to showcase their work. They can reference it, saying I worked in a campaign for Arsenal and LABRUM and Adidas. And I feel like it would give them some sort of like a lift. And that's why I said to Arsenal and Adidas, let's go back home where my story starts. Let's shoot and bring the story to life, but with my people. We're not traveling with any photographers or videographers, but with my people, because I know they can deliver. And that's what we did. And it was one of the most fun projects I've worked in, because I feel like we were giving back. I specifically giving back to where I learned and start my life. And that's why it was, every time I look at that, it always gives me joy.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a proud moment for Sierra Leoneans, even those who don't support Arsenal.
Yeah.
Even those who don't support Arsenal, there are folks who got the away jersey just because it was associated with Sierra Leone. And so the question I will ask you, based on that project, then is, what is the real difference between real collaboration and tokenism? Because it could easily go the other way.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's the first thing I said here earlier. I said our culture is getting told by some people that don't actually understand what it means. But at the moment, it's the hypest thing to do. And they want to sell clothes, and they want to sell culture, and they will use that. And you can see the difference is they wouldn't go the extra mile to bring the story to life. They wouldn't go the extra mile to continue the story. Like, okay, we've taken from this place or this people, but what do we give back? Like, they can probably hire like very expensive people to come to Sierra Leone or Ghana or Nigeria, create a beautiful story, not think about the local, not think about, have we left a legacy? Does it benefit anyone after we've gone? And that's how you can reevaluate what's tokenism and what's like brands that are actually ready to dive into the culture. The fact that Adidas and Arsenal was so open and asked me to direct everything, like, this is your story, this is your home. We're here to support what you lead. And that tells you, like, they're not here to just take. They're just like, no, you drive us. We just the passenger. And that's how it should be. It's like, what's the point of bringing someone to tell your story when you're the best person to tell a version of your story? And the fact that we're very open as well for me to work with locals, to work with people that I believe they will bring my vision to life. And that's what we end up with. It's like a beautiful film done by Sierra Leoneans for the world.
Yeah, incredible. So then how do we replicate that kind of relationship? How do African designers move from being invited into these spaces? I mean, we've seen over the last 5-10 years, we've seen a lot of African fashion designers walking global runways. But there's a real difference between being invited and you participate in one show and really owning the space and, the permanence of it all.
We need support. We need support from our own governments, from our own people, to create the spaces that we can own and call it ours. And also, we need to support each other. And I feel like if we have those fundamental values, we can share spaces of our own that is owned by us, for us. That's what, like, sometimes you need to be invited to the spaces to have exposure. And sometimes I feel like it's what we take from those opportunities. And sometimes we get carried away because we were like, I'm here now. I don't have to, I've been accepted in the so-called space, like this is a global space, like these are the top. If you're here, that means you've made it. But what do you do to give back to the place where you came from? And how do you want to set an infrastructure so that you can create that space that we can call a space that we can invite them to come to as well? Because that's what it is. It's like, can we create equal space, equal opportunity for ourselves and for everybody else that we can invite to come to us? And then that's what it takes for me. It's like, I do things that deep down comes from my heart and my guts. The feeling is telling me that's what I need to do. I don't anchor on anything just because this is the in thing to do and everyone needs to be doing this because everyone's like that. Everyone is saying to me, yo, you need to be in TikTok, you need to be doing this because that's where everything is happening. I'm like, look at me, I ain't a TikTok guy. I can't do that, save my life. I said, no, I tell real story, authentic story. Maybe it sits on TikTok, maybe, but I don't have to be, I'm not saying whatever is happening in TikTok is bad, but I'm just saying it's not for everyone. It's like there's different ways to like bring stories to light, like educate people. Why don't we find those different mediums and educate people and tell them about how amazing we are, the beauty, our landscape, our clothes, our people, our food, our music. These are things that we should be proud of. And I want to do that. I went to live in London, in England for all my life. I've learned so much, like from British culture. I've intertwined British culture with my African heritage, and like something is born out of it. And I want that to be replicated. Yeah.
I must admit, I've given into the TikTok pressure. I joined TikTok about a week ago. And it's definitely not for everyone. That's very true. But on the conversation about what it takes for African designers to own the space, I would also want to know what you think it takes, what creative excellence demands that people don't see often. And I ask that because my opinion is that the creative sector is overly romanticized. because it has the lights and the glamour, the makeup, the hair, the this and the that, and people often get carried away by what it looks like, not necessarily thinking about how much work goes into that beautiful picture moment, or how much work goes into creating a film, or how much work goes into designing a line and showing up at fashion shows every couple of months. So what do you think creative excellence demands that we don't see often?
I think it's a level of work sometimes, and I feel like we're always in a speed of like delivering things and not caring about what it means, how much value it carries, how do we nurture it, how do we reproduce that? And I think that's the problem sometimes. A lot of people like the glamour, like you said, like I work in fashion, I work in advertising, I work in TV. Well, maybe not a lot of people put in the amount of work that you have to do to get to the top. It's a lot of work, and it's hard work.
So just to add to that, what then, if you were to maybe talk about or list 3 things young creatives looking at LABRUM should learn for longevity, standard, and just all-round excellence, what are 3 things young creatives should think about? What are some structures or habits you think would help?
I'll say first thing, make sure you research into whatever area you want to go into. And also work hard, plan, because planning is the key to be successful. If you don't have a plan or structure, you're just going to be in a circle, like coming back, around. So those are the fundamental things that help me. Like I'm always intentional about what I wanted to do and then plan as to how I execute it. And once I get there, and then it's like, okay, I'm here, and this is the things. I always make sure I learn from mistakes, and so that I don't take it on and do it again and again and again. And that's what we gotta be ready to put in the work. It's not all about the glamour. Put in the work, you will see the benefit.
On a policy level, what kind of conversations do you think we should be having to boost creativity and to also make sure that Sierra Leone is on a level where we could not just compete globally, but also be able to collaborate with other countries who are doing amazing things creatively?
Again, like it comes down to it, we need to be having those discussions as to what the creatives need. Because sometimes you have those conversations within a bubble, within creatives, but they're not the policy makers. They need to be able to be in those rooms to influence how those policy makers think and work, and when they think about creatives. So yeah, we've got to get creatives into those spaces to be able to get to somewhere. But I think that's why sometimes I'm like, it's weird to go and sit down with creatives to try and talk about policy without having the policy people in the room, because we'd just be talking to ourselves. We know what we need. There's various things that I've pinpointed from working with the boys here. It's lack of opportunity. There's a lot of creativity here. They all have like very creative minds, good thinkers, and I have loads of ideas in abundance. But there's one thing having ideas, and it's another thing having the opportunity to implement those ideas. And I think that's what is missing here. If we can create opportunities and space for these kids to be able to create and deliver work, and then I think it will be a better, and we can see the benefit, and we can reap the benefit. because there's a lot of young kids here that's so creative. You talk to them, the energy, the passion, the things that they wanted to do, but they don't have the equipment. They don't have they don't have it, things. It's just a facility. They don't have it. So if we can create more opportunities for them, I think we're onto something about the youth. The youth are the future. If you have to be deluded to not see that, like, we have to support them in any way, shape or form. Create spaces for them, create opportunity. Let them grow. If you look at it, the UK creative sector is bringing in 3 billion into the economy. That's a lot of money. But because there's a lot of opportunity for them to create work, why can we not create that here? Create spaces for the kids to meet, hang out, create beautiful work, help them to monetize this work, and then we have something.
As we round up the conversation now, just because of what LABRUM represents, if young people are interacting with the brand, seeing it, loving it, understanding what it represents, what would you encourage young designers to think about if they want to create something that is authentic and something that goes beyond just fashion and trends, something that is worth holding on to as legacy?
I would say be authentic, don't copy, because it's distasteful when people copy and you can see it clearly from where it's coming from. Everyone has a story. Focus on those stories, refine those stories, learn, keep learning, because you're never too old to learn, and embrace who you are. And I think those sort of values will get you somewhere, because there's no point sometimes some kids talk to me about what they create and they want to do, and then I said to them, send me the work, and then I see myself in the work. You know, like someone is presenting your own work to you, and they're claiming that this is what I'm working on. And you're like, are you okay? What feedback can I give you? Because it's my work. So now I'm saying to them, I'm starting to be a bit blunt and say, no, use it as an inspiration, to start point, and then keep working on it, refine the work. You will find your own aesthetic, because it's so easy to copy, because you see it. But I also look at other designers that aspire. I look at their work, not copy it, look at it as an inspiration, because you've got to find an anchor point of your own work. What stories do you want to tell? And then once you find those stories, it all comes together. So,
and what, final question, what responsibility do you think comes with owning that authenticity and telling these stories? What responsibility do you think lies on designers
a huge
who
one.
choose to do that?
A huge one, and I think that's why we should continue to support and educate the uninformed about some of this sort of issues that we face, and also helping these kids where you help them sort of with their narrative building and brand building as well, to make sure we can guide them to not live in a world of like copy culture. It's like also everyone can't be a designer, because then who buys from anyone? If you're a designer, I am, and everybody else is, who are we selling to? So there's no consumer, so we're just making clothes. For who? And also another thing that Sierra Leonean designers are young creatives. Don't just think local. You've got to think global to be able to scale. Yes, dominate your local, learn, because sometimes you need the core base, but don't set up to just target local, because we're a small nation. And how much money do you need to make to sustain yourself? You got to think about that. And if you just target Sierra Leonean, then you're targeting 8 million people.
Or less.
or less. Exactly. Maybe I'm just
Some of them are kids
yeah, exactly. Let's say
who don't have money.
who don't have money. Exactly. So, but if we think anything I make has a Sierra Leonean imprint for global consumption, then you probably have a legs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like we just need to just keep thinking, how do we scale? How do we think? Because you can't just make clothes for just Sierra Leonean.
Yeah.
It has to be about the world as well.
Right. And how do you define success?
Again, for me, success is how I see it. It's like, if I can leave a legacy, for me, that's successful. I'm not driven by money. I'm more driven by be able to create a space that people can feel seen. And also to live a legacy whereby in 50 years or so, a kid from Sierra Leone or from somewhere from Africa or London will look back as a reference point and say, someone does look like me and started a brand and made it this far. And that's success for me. If I can influence another kid that they will feel like he could do or emulate what I've done, yeah, I'm good.
Well,
So,
thank you very much. This has been a very lovely conversation.
I'm here, like I said, I'm always, people can use me as a sounding board. I'm happy where I can to support. And then hopefully we can create a spirit, a group of amazing people here that sooner or later they can be also a sounding board for the younger generation and have a beautiful so thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it for today's episode of Honestly Speaking. Thank you for listening and being a part of these important conversations. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please like and share. And if you're feeling inspired, do leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. And of course, carry on the conversation online. Share your thoughts, experiences, and ideas using hashtag HonestlySpeakingSL. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay honest.